everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to try to understand what a neurodiverse approach is. It's obviously the approach that we follow at the school that I'm at, the Bridge in Sandton, and we're going to try and understand what that means. There are a lot of definitions. It's been around a long time. It's nothing I invented. It's just the approach that we follow. So we're going to try and understand that tonight. We're going to try and understand what it means to be somebody who's neurodiverse and what approach we follow. So thank you for joining us. Let's hope we can achieve those goals as we go along. So first of all, we're going to watch a little video, and in this video, the lady will explain, and it's an animated video, so it's very short, and the explanation of neurodiversity will be a lot better than my explanation, but we'll talk as we go along. All right, let's have a look at this video.
Neurodiversity is a term that applies to all those with neurological differences, including dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, or the autistic spectrum, or indeed those who have a number of overlapping or co-occurring differences. It is being used more commonly to nurture the idea that these differences are a valuable variation, an important part of human diversity, something to be celebrated rather than cured. It recognises that everyone with a neurological difference is an individual, not part of a labelled group who will all behave, react, or learn in the same way. And it focuses on celebrating what people with additional needs can do, rather than what they struggle with, in order to fully realise their potential in school, employment, and life.
All right, now we're going to look at maybe what comes before neurodiversity, functional areas of the brain. I'd like to look at specific areas. It's a topic for a long webinar, so we're going to just look at specifics. So if you can follow the mouse, you can see what we're talking about. There's the frontal lobe and what it means. So the frontal lobe, we've got movement, problem solving, concentration, thinking, and even, very importantly, behavior, personality, and mood. All of that comes out of the frontal lobe of the brain, if you like. Next part, temporal lobe, next to it, hearing, language, memory. Next to that, the occipital lobe, vision, perception, and beyond that, and next to that, the parietal lobe, sensations, language, perception, and body awareness, if you like. So interesting how the four lobes of the brain, the major lobes of the brain, are made up, and then also in between, you'll see that area, that's the motor area of the brain, controlling voluntary muscles, running, speed, climbing, coordination, and so on. That's one of the major areas of the brain that handles that. Then we can see the cerebellum at the bottom of the brain, where that relates to posture, balance, and as you can see, coordination of movement. And then right next to that, the brain stem running down into the spinal cord, consciousness, breathing, heart rate, obviously, all of these parts together, what it's about. And then you can see the different areas of the brain and how somebody may have an area that's not as strong as another area. And there you can kind of see that later on. We'll come back to a little quiz and we can look at different areas of the brain and you can see how far you are. So this little symbol that you see there, it's called the rainbow infinity symbol, and it denotes neurodiversity. So worldwide, people, when they see this symbol, they will recognize the idea that this is about neurodiversity. And you can see all the different colors right around. And you'll see the theme of even tonight's talk is a lot to do with different colors, because that's what it's about. It's about colors. Colors are bright. All our children at our school are bright. It's just about different colors shine brighter than other colors, if you like. So that's our symbol. The Autism Society also adopted the symbol a few years ago as well. But everybody, if you saw this symbol, you know that we're talking about neurodiversity. So let's have a look at some of the things, the definition of what we're talking about. So first of all, the definition of neurodiversity. So we could define it like this, and many definitions would say it's an approach to learning and disability that basically argues that diverse neurological conditions are the result of normal variations in the human genome. So what that really means is it's normal. We're all different. We have strengths, we have weaknesses. It's normal to be different. And I think that's what this is about. And this idea originated already in the 90s. And at the time, the views were very much about problems and a medical model where everything was pathological, so that's a disease, a problem, and neurological diversity was seen as exactly that, as inherently pathological, if you like. So that's where this has come from, the concept of neurodiversity, if you like, way back in the 90s already. Then if we look a little bit further, we should recognize neurological differences as being the same as maybe social categories. So on a par with maybe gender, sexual orientation, that's all it is. It's a category, differences, that's all. Neurological variations are a vital part of all of us, of humanity, such as variations in size, shape, skin color, personality, if you like. All differences, we need it throughout the world. We need those differences, and it's the same for brain differences, if you like, neurological differences. And I think that's really what it's all about there. Then what do we do? Neurodiversity promotes support systems, such as inclusion. So we really want to include people rather than exclude people because of differences in terms of brain strengths and weaknesses, if you like. So we want to include people. So that's part of it. Accommodations. Those of you in an educational field, you know what that means. That means a person who may need a little bit longer time, possibly, to get to the answer or to formulate an answer. But eventually we will get a truer definition of what that person's capable of by giving them extra time. So that's one of the accommodations. Communication assistive technologies. That's an interesting one. Quite a few little guys at our school battle with, and we'll talk about it later on, battling to write, battling to formulate ideas and really just to use their fine motor coordination to form letters or to write. And so one of the technological accommodations that we would offer them, if you like, is to work on an iPad where they are able to tap the letters rather than write the letters. And at the end of the day, we're still going to get to what that person is capable of and their real potential and capabilities. So that's one of the things. And as that definition also says, it allows us, neurodivergent people who are not all exactly the same, to live as they are. And we want them not to be coerced, not to be forced to adopt what other people would accept as an idea of normality. We want them to live as they are, not to be forced to be something that they are not. Then some of the skill sets that neurodiverse school, if you like, or a person with some of these things, some of these skill sets can include high levels of intelligence, pattern recognition, specific approaches to problem solving, exacting attention sometimes, and then sometimes comfort with repetition. Not everyone's comfortable with some of those things, but those are strengths and will lead to advances for all of us ultimately. Then some of the neurological variations that we might look at our school, or we might have, autism, and we're going to talk definitely some more about it in more detail, and learning disabilities, ADHD. They may be disabilities, but they are not flaws. There's a big difference between those things. People work very hard to cope with their disabilities, to cope in life. It's not about being flawed, it's about being different. That's really what it's about. People with neurological differences are not broken. They're not incomplete versions of normal people. They're different versions. That's really all it is. So let's look at what we do at school. So by following that neurodiverse approach at the bridge, our students with learning and thinking differences, if you like, they benefit greatly because they're in an environment where they are accepted. They've got differences, but they're fully accepted. So our goal is to ensure that our approach will allow for that individual style. And that's what I was saying earlier, rather than trying to fit the child into another person's style. We want to recognize that individual at our school. That's what it's about. And then it's a massive part of that approach to ensure that we eliminate as far as we can, or at least reduce greatly, the outdated stigmas, because no matter what you do, there will be a stigma in some other way if you have some neurodiversity, if you like. And the idea at our school is to do away with that, to reduce it greatly. I'm not sure we can eliminate things entirely, but definitely to reduce that. And perceptions around learning and thinking differences. We want people to see that there are differences, not weaknesses, just differences to a large extent, maybe strengths even. So disability, no matter how profound, does not diminish personhood. People with atypical brains are fully human, with proper human rights, full human rights, just like everyone else. And I think that's not how the entire world sees these things, but I believe that that's an approach we should all have. And as you can see, people with disabilities can live rich, meaningful lives, maybe overcoming some of those disabilities, if you like, or difficulties, but as long as the stigma is not negative about them and people are there to support and to help, and then for the person to overcome much of those things themselves. And I think that's a way to live. None of us has the right, the wisdom, if you like, to try and improve upon our species, the human beings, if you like, by deciding which characteristics to keep and which to discard. Every person is valuable. You know, there's a lot of research that's going into I think it's gene therapy, gene research, where very clever doctors are working with babies in the womb and working out this gene or this particular thing will lead to a particular disability. Let's try and cut it out before it even happens. I'm not so sure about the ethical value of that or whether that's the right thing to do. Obviously, it's a debate. But for me, I like the fact that we are all different and we need to accept each other as being different, not try to cut some of these things out. So I'm going to put another video up for you. This lady is a psychologist, so she's working from a really different perspective, if you like. She talks about the medical model first and then goes on to other ideas. We're going to watch this video now. She explains it very well. Let's put that up for you now.
Neurological differences like autism or ADHD are considered to be dysfunctional disorders and disabilities under the medical model of mental health. There's too little attention given to enabling people with neurologically different minds to be accepted for themselves, to discover and celebrate their strengths, and to find a place in society that values their differences. When most of us think of diversity, we think of things like race or sexual orientation, but there's a different kind of diversity you might not know about: neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is the concept that neurological differences among people should be recognized and respected. I believe it's time for this new social movement, the neurodiversity movement, to take off. Neurodiversity is a part of our genetics and of our evolution as a species. The genes for autism and ADHD are not errors, but rather are the result of variations in the human genome that have and will continue to have advantages for society. One of the genes associated with ADHD, the DRD4 gene, is known as the novelty-seeking gene. It arrived on the human evolutionary scene over 10,000 years ago. Genes associated with autism also go back more than 10,000 years. Research suggests that genetic variants linked to autism might have been positively selected during human evolution because they contributed to exceptional memory skills, heightened perception in vision, taste, and smell, a precise eye for detail, and an enhanced understanding of systems such as animal behavior. These characteristics likely remain in the gene pool today because they are still advantageous. As a psychologist advising the parents of differently wired kids, I tell parents they have a choice between trying to change the child to fit the environment and changing the environment to fit the child. There are many different microhabitats and subcultures in our world. For an individual with autism or ADHD, finding success on their own terms may come from discovering the particular niche that fits best, the niche that allows their strengths to shine and their challenges to be minimized. Individuals with ADHD tend to thrive in situations of rapid change, variety, and that reward creativity and out-of-the-box thinking. A career as a comedian, detective, entrepreneur, journalist, actor, EMT technician, or photographer could be. I'm not saying that having autism or ADHD is easy. And I don't mean to downplay the real suffering that can be caused by having a neurodevelopmental condition, disability, or difference. But it's also time the world sees the beauty and value in brain differences. Neurodiversity might be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general. My vision is for a neurodiversity tolerant and accepting society where differences are celebrated for the depth and dimension they bring to the human condition. I want children whose brains are wired differently to be encouraged to find their niche instead of changing to fit other people's ideas of normal. Diversity in every sense makes our world a better place, and people who think differently are a huge part of that.
Right, I think that's pretty interesting, and she says it a lot better than I could. Let's look at some of those conditions and neurological differences, if you like, that you're likely to encounter and that we encounter every day at our school, and we support, we help. Let's have a look at some of them. So we're talking about neurodiversity, and that's the whole point. Everybody will have differences. So the first part we would look at is dyslexia. I think most people have I don't know if it's a misperception, but not understanding dyslexia properly. So dyslexia, a lot of people will say to you it's reversals. It's a B and a D, and they can't get those letters right. And yes, that may be a part of it, but that's not really what it's about. It's much more about the sounds, the language, and that's really the key. So dyslexia is a guy will battle with spelling, writing, reading. It'll be fairly pervasive right across the board, but not something that a person can't overcome long term. And that's part of the key of what we do, to give that support and to help. The second one in that little picture, dyscalculia, I think you can understand what that's all about. That's really for a little person that battles with numbers. So it will be to make calculations, but in general battling with numbers. So that he might be able to read pretty well or very well, but may battle with numbers and using numbers and manipulating numbers. So that's a possibility. But again, it's a thing that we recognize and we would like to help a child with such a problem. Last one, dysgraphia, if you like. So again, I'm pretty sure you can work that one out. That's to do with people battling with writing, really. So it's expressing themselves. It'll lead to problems with spelling probably, but also just generally writing. So again, related to dyslexia, and our job is to support and to help children with those kinds of conditions and to help them to improve. Really, it's just a difference. Difficulties, as that video showed us, definite difficulties, but that's our job at the Bridges, is to try and help with those things. What we do find, which is very interesting in our school, we find the emotional awareness of most of the children is very, very strong. So they are very much in tune with each other. When somebody's battling, somebody else would recognize that. They'll say, you're having a bad day. Why are you battling? What about anxiety? Why are you feeling anxious? Why are you feeling worried? And they seem to be very, very in tune. So that emotional awareness, if you like, is very strong. Another word for it could be emotional IQ, EQ. People talk about EQ, having that emotional intelligence, if you like, being aware of other people's emotions. So that's sometimes a strength that you might find in somebody else who may have a dyslexic problem, but emotional awareness being strong. Dyspraxia, most people I think understand what dyspraxia is. Dyspraxia relates to motor learning difficulties, so coordination and motor problems. So motor means movement, whether it's fine movement, large movement, gross motor movement, fingers, jumping, running. So a child with these kinds of problems will present with those kinds of issues. But again, that's what we do. We want to support the child. We want to recognize that it's sure, it's a problem right now, but our idea is to help you to learn, to cope with it, to overcome what you can of it, but not always to fix things. Sometimes that diversity is interesting. Some people are fast runners, some people aren't. Some people are amazing soccer players, some people aren't. It's just a difference, not necessarily a weakness. Another one that's a strength, if you like, often children show this amazing visual perceptual ability, and I think we've all experienced it with our children these days. They seem to be very good with 3D things, whether it's gaming, maybe it's just because from a very early age they start with it, but they're very strong with those things, very strong with 3D things, visual perceptual abilities, if you like, across the board. So that's a thing we've been seeing as we go along as well. So you may have a weakness in some area, maybe not strong with motor movements, if you like, but very strong with visual perceptual ability. So interesting how it can be in one person, can have all these strengths and weaknesses all in one person. The next one, autism. Autism is an interesting one because it changed over the years. The psychologists and psychiatrists and neurologists have changed their definition over the years, and now we talk about autism spectrum disorder. So it's a kind of a thing where it's a problem. It's not going to go away, but it's going to make life difficult, but there are ways of coping. So we have many children at our school with this kind of issue. So, and when we talk about a spectrum, meaning it can be on the lower end of the spectrum, the higher end. People talk about high functioning sometimes, but we're talking about a little person who probably in essence would battle with expressing emotions, probably would battle with social interactions, if you like, but not to say anything about intelligence. We've got a little guy at our school. He is as bright as anyone. I'm sure if he was in a competition with people just to, test intelligence and, intelligence in certain areas, he'd be very, very, very strong. But on another day, he might battle and he might not want to express himself to you at all or talk to you at all. But on another day, he really will. So, and very well. So that's what we're talking about, and helping that little guy to cope with the world around him. Sometimes overcome some of these things, sometimes just have coping skills and survive some of the problems. But really, that's our job, to support as we go along and to understand what these problems are. Then another one, which I think everyone is aware of these days, all schools, everyone, and these days with lockdown, I think a lot of parents were alerted to the fact that their own children would battle with concentration and attention. And so that's the thing, I'm sure people have heard of ADD, attention deficit disorder, or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Really a child that battles to focus, to concentrate. And it's not something that you make up. There are specific diagnostic qualities that you would look for before you would make a definition or diagnosis, if you like, of ADD or ADHD. And it would be those things: battling to focus, battling to concentrate, battling to finish tasks in time, and so on. But if it was really severe, you would look at medication, and possibly that would help a child. And that little picture of the brain earlier, you would kind of see where that would fit in. But yeah, it really would be at a severe level that you would look at medication for something like that, or otherwise other methods to help a child to focus and concentrate and practice, if you like. I always used to talk in private practice very much with parents who were reluctant to medicate their children, and although it's a very safe medication ultimately to help children to focus and concentrate, we talk about sometimes alternatives, and swimming was one we always spoke about, because swimming is exactly that. You have to focus and concentrate, get from one side of the pool to the other side. There's nothing halfway, and often that would help a child with his focus and concentration, and also a very physical thing. So that was just one thing, but really the meds, when they work very well. They work the first day almost. So, and with very few side effects, although each child and each person will react differently. So that's the thing to think about. And again, at our school, many children have those problems, and that's our job to understand that and to cope with such a child. And then what we also find is often little guys have this creative ability, and creative ability can be across the board. It can be singing, it can be music, it can be all of those things: art, painting, design, if you like. Very much about creative ability. So often a child that may battle with some of these other things, such as attention and concentration, but creative ability incredible, or maybe dyspraxic, battling with movement and so on, but strong emotional awareness, or dyslexic but strong maybe visual perceptual ability. So in all of us, I think we will have strengths and weaknesses across the board. It's just that often with these little people, it's exacerbated. It's just made to look so much worse. However, it shouldn't be. We should be able to cope with those things and assist these little guys with whatever these issues may be. So those are many of the things that we cope with at our school. And I think the idea is ultimately, as that last video showed, the lady said it, and I truly believe that. I would like a world, a society where we see all of these issues as maybe differences, not weaknesses. And I think that's really what it's all about. So those are some of the references that we did, that I based this talk on tonight. I had a lot of help with things. My own son Matthew helped me to set up the presentation. I've had Colin helping with this webcast. Across the board, it's people have helped to set this up, and I would like to thank all of them for that. We're going to look at some questions in a minute. What I'm going to bring up now is a questionnaire, if you like. It's a quiz, and I'm going to leave this on the screen. Latabo has been holding my hand the whole time with me this evening, and he's helped me with this. And we're going to have a look at that. We've got a couple of questions that we will look at that are maybe in the sidebar, and then also, if you are able to ask a question, or you wish to ask a verbal question, you will be able to unmute yourself and ask that question out loud. So we're going to unmute you now, and you may ask a question. If people talk over each other, we'll get to it. I'm going to leave this quiz on for you to look at, and in a little while I will bring up the answers. So let's look at some of the questions. Latava is helping me with some of these. So one of the things is, can you medicate for any of these conditions? And how would you help a child with these issues? So medication will be across the board depending on whatever the situation is. So if it's ADHD, sure, there is medication. Autism, not so much. It's much more about how you help that child to cope with his world around him and so on. However, each child will show differences. Every person is an individual. Some medications will work very well. Some won't work so well with a particular child. It would very much depend. But I don't think medication in itself is an answer to any of these things. And again, we're not looking to fix people 100%. We're looking to help people more than anything and bring out their strengths in other ways. So if we can cope with some of the areas that are weaker, then great. Then we can bring out their strengths. I think that's pretty much what we're looking for. Somebody asked a question. It's a great question. And it's about the bridge, as in the school where we are. Why do we not include music and drama as part of the curriculum? And it's a lovely question. And it's really it's a thing that we are looking at, and I would really love to do that, because, as I said earlier, there are so many children that may have those strengths and those abilities across the board, and we would like for them to shine in that area. They may battle with concentration, but maybe they can sing, maybe there's music, and I would really like them to shine in that area. So those are ways that we're looking at, and then you're absolutely right to have asked that question. That's really the right way to do things. So we also look towards, our school is called the Bridge for Assisted Learning, and the idea is that if we help a child to cope well with some of the difficulties and issues that they may have, and then bring out the strengths that they have, they may well be able to move across to what people would consider a mainstream environment, where there would be a lot more children and far less support maybe, but maybe they're strong enough, overcoming anxiety, overcoming some of their problems and coping with them, and being strong enough to maybe go back to a mainstream environment. That is possible. So I'm going to, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a verbal question, let's see if we can answer. I really don't have all the answers. I have some of the answers some of the time. Sometimes I won't even understand the question. So let's see. Anyone like to unmute themselves and ask a question?
I was just wondering if a child who has these differences will always have to be in a special environment, or if at some point they will be able to like reintegrate.
Great question, thank you. Yes, probably we follow a mainstream curriculum, if you like, with the idea that our children are bright. They may have difficulties in some areas, and if we can overcome some of the barriers, which would be maybe anxiety. Sometimes the child is as bright as anybody, but anxiety will cause problems. We can overcome their anxiety. Sometimes we can bring out their strengths, with the idea that, yes, possibly to reintegrate into a mainstream classroom, if you like. Remember, mainstream often means larger, so it can be 25 or 35 or 45. It can be many things. So, but the idea is still we follow that mainstream curriculum in order to ultimately, if the person is able to overcome some of these issues and shine across the board, maybe they will be able to go back into a mainstream environment. In fact, that's what we work towards. That's why we have a regular curriculum, if you like, a mainstream curriculum. So thank you for that one. Any other questions if somebody would like to ask?
Greg, there are 2 questions in the question box if you want to tackle that so long.
Yes, let's tackle some of those. I see that as we go along. Let's look down. All right, so mainstream schools' approach to adopt a wider neurodiverse approach, if you like, in preschool. I think a lot of so-called mainstream schools are able to work with children with issues, that if they recognize them and if their staff are able to recognize some of these issues, then maybe they can tackle some of those things as they go along. So, you know, it very much depends on the school, depends where, depends on what the problems are. I also think, and this is the thing that I've chatted to a lot of people about, I think as parents, we are unlikely to want to recognize some of the issues until they really are issues. So sometimes our little guys at a preschool level may display some issues and we're not sure, and we almost feel like we need to be sure. So sometimes it takes a grade 1 teacher ultimately to show that your child is really struggling to master the work and to master the volume of work, if you like. And then sometimes we're much more available at that level as parents to recognize that there may be issues. But the theory will tell us that we really need to tackle these issues as soon as possible. People talk about the fact that OT, speech therapy, and all the related therapies are most effective at a younger age. So whoever asked that question is exactly right. The younger you can tackle some of those issues, the earlier that you as a parent are able to recognize and accept that your child may have some issues to be worked on, the better the prognosis will be further on. So it's not to say that an 11-year-old or 12-year-old can't benefit from OT or whatever, even speech therapy, but really much more effective at a younger age, if you like. I suppose it's much about that developing brain, if you like. Couple of other questions, semi-related. I'm trying to cover many different things. Do we take student teachers? We do, and really we like to expose people to our world. It's not a simple world, and most of our teachers are specifically qualified for this world. And so a student coming to our environment would probably, in terms of their studies, it would be an aspect that I would like them to do. So that is a part of it. So, but yes, long answer to a short question there. Somebody else also asked, is there somebody online that would like to ask a verbal question? We'll come back to the other questions.
Yes, I would like to ask something. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. I work in a mainstream school and I head up a learning support center. So one of our biggest challenges is how do we accommodate a child on the autistic spectrum? So one of the points that you made was change the environment to fit the child. And that, I think, refers very much to the curriculum. My difficulty is this. So we find that these children are very concrete, and as you mentioned, very good with memorization skills and so forth. But as you progress into the higher grades, the children are just expected to be more divergent in their thinking. You think out of the box. You've got to draw conclusions, make inferences. And so how do you actually lead a child to matric in a mainstream school if they really find this kind of thinking that is so common nowadays, and you're trying to get the children to problem solve and so forth, and they really struggle with that kind of thing? So what do you do? And that for me is probably one of the biggest challenges of accommodating our autistic children in our school. And our school goes from triple naught right to matric.
Right, you're absolutely correct. It's a massive challenge, and we are taking on, and maybe we can learn from you as we go along, but next year we're starting a grade 8 class at our school, because sometimes the children have not been able to overcome some of those issues at an earlier age and even into high school. However, the child is very often bright, and we need to accommodate that as well. So of course it's a challenge to be able to do that. And yes, we do want to look at the individual child. So we want to make sure that the environment fits the child rather than the child having to force to fit into the environment. And you're absolutely right. Part of that would be the curriculum. So we're not sure where we're going, but and I'm not sure that there are many pilot models out there to show us in terms of this kind of thing. But I do believe that we can construct a curriculum as we go along, which would accommodate across the board, and trying to accommodate all children, and specifically autistic children, where maybe by, let's say, age 13 or 14, they overcome some of the issues or learn to cope with some of the issues. But ultimately, we do have a situation where we have a matric exam where very much, I don't even start on why that's wrong, but the idea is very much about memory tasks, very little about application. And I hope that in the future, that by the time of some of our children, our grade 8 reach matric, we will have moved away from just that kind of rote repetition, and that it is application. And often the autistic child won't verbalize it, but they will show you and they will do it. And we've experienced that with younger children. I hope that's going to be the case going forward with older children into the high school. So yeah, maybe we can learn from you as we go along as well. We can learn from everybody. I think that's the idea. We've got to learn how to adapt our environment to suit the child, and even the curriculum, if you like. So yeah, great question.
Mercy has her hand up. Mercy?
Yes, I've got a question. Thank you so much for the presentation. My question is, I noticed that Chris, my son, gets little work and rarely homework, that much homework as compared to the previous schools he has been to. I would like to understand that, is it a strategy to cope with the challenges that they face, or there are other reasons they associated with the less work they give? Because as a parent, I expect him to come with a lot of work for him to be continually engaged, even to be recommended books to read, come with, to have something that at least at home they are working with. I've not been seeing that. And also my second question is, as a school, have you ever recommended to parents that a child is now ready to join the mainstream? Not that we think the mainstream is upper or superior, but just, have you done that before, to say, we have worked with your child, and at this particular moment, we are so confident that he or she is ready to join the mainstream? Thank you.
Thank you, Mercy. Yes, let's tackle both those questions. Great questions in themselves. So the first part, in terms of what you might perceive as homework or the child having to do that side of things, my personal belief is that we need to work in the classroom. We need to work as far as we can and understand the concepts and understand what we're doing in the classroom, and even practice in the classroom. And we would set specific goals. And although we really have to follow a mainstream curriculum, we still want specific goals. So let's take grade 1. So we would take a little person and say, by the end of grade 1, what do we need to achieve? What does the curriculum say to us, and what can we do? And then work with that for each child. So if at the end of grade 1 we're looking at, maybe the goals are to be able to read and spell and even add, never mind subtract, we can do that in grade 2, but let's say those are the goals, then we would work towards that. And if a little person battles specifically with one area, we want to help that person to overcome maybe the numbers, and maybe you can read, or the other way around. But I don't believe there's a lot of value in a 10, 12-year-old, if you like, going home and spending 3 or 4 hours of homework with a mom or dad who are tired or stressed, or maybe don't have the expertise to help their child with a particular subject. So it's not what we want to do. And I think that's the idea of the specialized teacher, having the expertise to help them inside the classroom, not necessarily sending those problems home. So that's, I think, my answer to your first part. Then the second part, and I'm not sure if this little guy's mom's tuned into this webinar, but so for instance, just as an example, we have many children this year. I think we've got about 5 little people that are going back into a mainstream, if you like. Some of them have been in mainstream, some of them started with us, but the idea is that we've become much more confident in these, and these little people have become more confident. So this particular person, he's a wonderful little boy. He can do so many things. His strengths, that's exactly, he's the perfect example of neurodiversity, if you like. And if you want to see what I mean, you can find the link for our virtual open day that we had recently. And this little guy is one of the people there. This little person, he's got so many strengths across the board. He can do so many things, but battled a little maybe with anxiety and so on. So he's overcome many of those things. And I think he's totally ready to go back to a mainstream environment, if you like. He has certain areas that he's overcome, that he's worked with, and his parents have been very involved in helping him. But yes, he will be back in a mainstream environment next year, and so will, I think, 3 or 4 other little children at our school, because they've overcome some of those issues, if you like. Some of the stronger issues, bigger, larger, much more major issues, if you like, it will take a little longer possibly for that child to overcome those things, or maybe they may need support for much longer, and that's why we've even looked at a grade 8 going forward, because we want to support that child with a small class, with specifically qualified teachers, with a curriculum possibly where we don't want the child to have to fit in. We want to be able to work with the curriculum for that particular child. So there we go. Another long answer to a short question, I think. I hope that answers that. I'm going to take 1 or 2 more. Anybody online? Otherwise, we've got a couple that we can take from the box.
Charmaine's got a hand up, Greg.
Okay.
Hi,
Charmaine.
yes. Hi there. I've just posted a question. I'm not sure if it came through, but just to understand with our children that have spectrum disorders, or I know you said not that word, but children that have gone to a school where they've bridged or been at a remedial environment, how does one integrate them into a high school across South Africa? Because our experience has been that we haven't managed to find any environment that our remedial child has been able to cope in. And, we're sitting at a grade 9 level this year, and after a great experience between grade sort of 4, 5, 6, and 7 in a remedial environment, we're not able to continue educating her because there aren't any options available. How does one take them from this environment, if they really need that help, across South Africa and continue with a good education if we want to be neurodiverse people, or we want to offer them that opportunity?
Right. It's an excellent question, and that's why we are starting the Bridge grade 8 from next year, because we feel there's no time limit on these things, and we wouldn't want to put a person into the box or a time limit to say that by 12 or 13 or by the end of grade 7 everything is sorted and everything is fine, because it may not be the case. So depending on the individual or what the specific problems may be, we would like sometimes to extend that support a little longer, and I'm sorry to hear that you don't have that support in wherever you are, but we do believe that sometimes a child will need that support going forward. It's not to say that that person is not capable of, as you put it, a good education ultimately, where the child can learn to be whatever he or she may want to be, whether it's an engineer or whatever, the strongest skills, if you like. But we would like to accompany that child, and I think that's the start of our journey next year with the grade 8s, to be able to say, we will give you that support. And that support would mean, probably in our world anyway, a small class where the teacher knows exactly what issues may be coming up every day. It will mean support lessons in the afternoons, focusing on specific issues, and then ultimately choosing the correct subjects for that particular child. It's difficult because, I think there's something like 100 different subjects that your person could take for matric, or more. So it's difficult, and ultimately you need to choose the ones that are going to suit the majority of the people at the school, if you like, and with teachers with expertise in that area. So it's difficult to say about an individual, but I would definitely say I agree with you that sometimes our children haven't suddenly magically, everything is perfect by age 13, and they may need more support going forward. And I would hope that schools in general would offer that support, if not what we can offer in terms of a very, very small class and, maybe specifically qualified teachers, but maybe even in a high school environment. I've been chatting to a few people about, at our school, we have a thing called an IEP. So it's an individualized educational program for little guys. Somebody even joked and said, you've got a bridging class at the bridge. So don't know about that, but maybe even in the high school, maybe we need that support. Maybe specific children need that support going forward to ultimately reach their potential. It's very difficult to say, and I agree with you. I don't think that our schools really look at that as much as they should, but maybe going forward we can start such an approach, if you like. I'm going to take another question, and then after that, if we haven't answered all the questions, then easy to get hold of me, gpienaar@thebridgeschool.co.za. Send me a question, we can have a look at it, and sometimes there'll be even people that are far more clever than I am and they can answer your question. But let's look. If there's something that we haven't got to, please send it to me, we can have a look. Let's take one more question. Anybody else?
Greg, while we're waiting, I just want to mention the virtual open day of the bridge is on YouTube. I found it easiest by searching for your name, Dr. Greg Pienaar, and then it pops straight up. So if anybody wants to go and watch the virtual open day of the bridge on YouTube, it's actually up and ready to watch, and it's really worth it. It's not very long, so you don't have to devote too much of your time to it, but I think it will give you a really good insight into how the bridge works.
Thank you, Colin. That's great. And there you will be able to see some of the little guys at our school, and I'm sure you'll make out the little guy that I'm talking about. Amazing little person, and he's really done really well this year. All right, so let's take one more from our list then, if you like. It's one of the questions is, do we use any other form of therapy to assist and regulate emotional stress and responses, and so on? And then the person's even mentioned something specific. So yes, it is. I would say we have a relatively small school, so we've got 130 little guys at our school. And if I had to, talk about a percentage of children that may battle with stress, if you like, or anxiety, it's a very high percentage, probably 80 to 90%. So we at the bridge, we've got therapies for the little people. So they will OT and speech, they love to go. We obviously follow mainstream, so we've got sport, we've got play ball. They love to do all of those things. We will have, somebody asked earlier, music in the future, and that's, we do art. So we will look at those things in the future, because a child needs a well-rounded situation. But sometimes a child will require maybe more specific therapy, if you like, counseling, or maybe on an individual basis. We do look at the school. Luckily, I'm a psychologist, so at our school there are little guys with issues, and if I'm available, which is sometimes, we can do kind of pre-counseling, if you like. And then if I'm really worried that the child needs a little bit more, then we would look at maybe talking to a therapist about proper therapy week for week, or a couple of sessions, or whatever the case may be. So we would look at that as well. So it's about, we are able to possibly look at the situation, analyze it, come up with some answers or some problem solving, if you like, looking ahead and saying, this is what your child requires. And that's very much about that individual person, whether they have specific problems. We would like to help with those specific problems. And I think even next year, we're going to, I feel we want to integrate a lot more. So the speech therapist, the occupational therapist, the psychologist, if you like, if a person is working with specific stress techniques or something to do with anxiety, we want everyone to be in the same conversation, to talk about that little person and have a unified approach towards the future to bring out the best in that child. So yeah, we are able to look at a lot of those different things, and possibly to bring on board people as we go along, whether it's therapists, full-time therapists, or counselors, if you like. We would really like to look at that as a model going forward as well. So that's where we're at. So I don't think I brought up the answers to the little brain quiz. If you were able to do that, I must say it's very difficult. If you weren't able to pick up those answers very easily, then you'll just join all of us, because sometimes it's really a study to recognize which part of the brain works with which part. So, but for me, it's interesting to look at that and to see where a child may have some strengths, some weaknesses, what has to grow, what are we doing. So it's very interesting for me to look at that. So those are some of the answers. This session was recorded, so you're very welcome to look at it later, look at the questions, look at the answers, test yourself if you like. It's not really meant to be a test, it's just meant to be an idea for yourself to have a look at some of these parts of the brain. So hopefully we'll chat again. We'll have a look at, somebody asked the last time, can we talk about topics, you know, what is this, anything specific? And absolutely, I would take anybody's input in terms of what we can talk about next time. But this is very important to us because it's the approach of the bridge, and I wanted people to understand what it's really about. So thank you everybody for joining us. Hopefully you can join us next time and we can chat, and I love the questions because they make you think about things that maybe you didn't think about. So thank you very much everybody.